even look at formulas, there is one principle that runs through almost every workbook we build. Don't try to put everything on one worksheet. A good workbook normally separates different jobs. For example, we might have data worksheets. These contain the main records. For example, clients, students, products, employees, activity or transaction worksheets. These record things that happen. For example, jobs, payments, attendance, orders, inquiry worksheets. These allow somebody to select a client, product, or other record and quickly retrieve information. Dashboard worksheets. These summarize the important information. Workings. Worksheet. We often require calculations in one worksheet, and the results can be used and manipulated in lots of other worksheets. Control worksheets. These check whether anything appears to be wrong with the data. That separation makes a workbook much easier to understand, maintain, and expand. And underneath almost all of those worksheets is our first major Excel feature. When we're storing lists of records in Excel, I nearly always want them stored as an Excel table. Suppose we have a client list containing client ID, client name, contact name, email. Instead of simply typing that information into a range of cells, select the data and press Ctrl+T. Excel converts the range into a table. Make sure My table has headers is selected. Now we have something much more useful than an ordinary range. Why tables matter? There are several important advantages. Tables automatically expand. If we enter another client directly underneath the table expands automatically. So our formulas, filters, and references can automatically include the new records. Formulas copy down automatically. If we enter a formula into a calculated column, Excel normally copies that formula through the entire column. Tables can be given meaningful names. Instead of something like Table 1, we can rename it Clients Table or Products Table. That makes our formulas much easier to understand, and it leads us to something you'll see constantly throughout the Lana Build workbooks. 3. Structured references. When formulas refer to an Excel table, Excel can use the names of the table and its columns, rather than ordinary A1 type cell references. This is called a structured reference. Even without knowing anything about the workbook, we can understand roughly what it is doing. It is looking through this specific column of this table. That is one of the reasons I prefer structured references in business workbooks. They're easier to read, they're easier to audit, and because tables expand automatically, the formulas normally expand with them. Throughout the Lana Build series, you'll see structured references used whenever practical. Unique IDs are so important. This is one of the most important design principles in the entire series. Every important record should normally have a unique ID for itself. Why bother with an ID for these records? Why not simply use the client name? Because names aren't always reliable. Two clients might have the same name. A company might change its trading name. Someone might spell the name slightly differently. But the ID remains unique. The same principle applies throughout our different workbooks. We might have ID for employer, ID for product, ID for order. The ID becomes the reliable link between different parts of the workbook. For example, a jobs table might contain, notice that we don't need to manually type all of the client's information into the jobs table. We store the client ID. Excel can then retrieve the client's name or other information when required. I want to introduce you to some of the functions we will be using throughout the series when building these real-life business spreadsheet solutions. They will explain to you themselves how they work and where to use them.
Hi, I am the XLOOKUP function. What job do I do? I find the correct record in one table and return the related information from that same record. Perfect whenever one piece of information identifies a record and you need something else from it. How I do my job. I start at the first row of your lookup column and compare the value you've asked me to find with each record, one by one. If the record doesn't match, I move down to the next row and try again. When I find the correct record, I stop searching. I then move across that same row to the column you've asked for and return the information. Because I search for the record itself, rather than a fixed position, I continue to work correctly even if your data is sorted, expanded or rows are inserted or deleted. Typical business uses. Look up customer details from a customer number. Return product descriptions, prices, or stock levels from a product code. Find employee information using an employee ID. Retrieve invoice details from an invoice number. Bring information together from different tables instantly. Why learn me? I can save hours of manual searching. I work left or right, unlike VLOOKUP. I continue working even when your data changes. I make spreadsheets easier to build, maintain, and understand. Think of me as the office's expert finder. I quickly find the correct record and return exactly the information you need.
Hi, I am SUMIFS function. What job do I do? I add up numbers, but only when every condition you give me is true. I'm perfect whenever you need totals for specific records that match several rules. How I do my job, I start at the first row of your table or list. For each row, I check every condition you've given me. If even one condition isn't met, I ignore that row and move on. If every condition is met, I take the value you want me to total and add it to my running total. I repeat this process until I reach the last row, then I return the final answer. Example. Imagine you're analysing thousands of sales records. Your manager asks, "What were our laptop sales in Dublin?" I go down every row in the table. For each record, I check. Is the region Dublin? Is the product laptop? If the answer to both questions is yes, I add that sale to my running total. If either answer is no, I ignore that row and continue searching. When I reach the bottom of the table, I return the total sales for laptops in Dublin. Typical business uses. Total sales by region and product. Total expenses by department and category. Total orders by customer and status. Why learn me? I give accurate totals every time. I handle multiple conditions automatically. I work with almost any business data. And I can save hours of manual filtering and adding. Think of me as the office's careful accountant. I check every rule before I add every number.
Hi, I am the if and ifs function. What job do I do? I make decisions based on rules and return the appropriate result. How I do my job. For every record, I test your conditions. If function asks one question. Is this condition true? If the answer is yes, I return one result. If the answer is no, I return another. Ifs function goes further. Instead of asking one question, I keep asking a series of questions until one of them is true. Then I return the matching result. I repeat the same decision process for every row, applying your rules consistently and accurately across the entire table. Typical business uses. Paid or unpaid invoice status. Pass, merit, or distinction, exam grades. New or existing customer labels. Bonus, commission, or discount calculations. Risk, priority, or approval classifications. Why learn me? I replace thousands of manual decisions with consistent business rules that are applied automatically across every record. If you remember one thing, if makes one decision, ifs function can make many. Both apply your business rules consistently every time.
Hi, I am the COUNTIFS function. What job do I do? I count how many records meet your conditions. How I do my job. I inspect the table, row by row. For each row, I check whether all of your conditions are met. If the row matches all the conditions, I add one to my count. If it does not match, I ignore it and move on. I do not add money or quantities. I simply count the number of matching records. At the end, I return the number of rows that passed your rules. Typical business uses. Count new customers, active customers, or customers by region. Count overdue invoices or unpaid accounts. Count bookings by course, month, company, or venue. Count open tasks, complaints, leads, or stock items below reorder level. Why learn me? I replace manual counting and give dashboards the counts they need to monitor activity. If you remember one thing, I count only the records that meet your conditions.
Hi, I am the if function. Nice to see you again. I want to introduce you to 3 friends of mine, the and, or, and the not functions. What job do they do? They test multiple conditions and reverse logical results when needed. How do they do their job? And checks a group of tests and returns true only if every test is true. Or checks a group of tests and returns true if at least one test is true. Not reverses a logical result, turning true into false and false into true. Together, they are often used with me, but also with the ifs, filters, and validation rules to express real business logic more clearly. Typical business uses. Approval rules with several conditions. Eligibility checks for discounts or bonuses. Compliance checks. Data validation rules. Status decisions involving several fields. Excluding records or identifying exceptions with not. Why learn them? We allow Excel to apply realistic business rules by combining conditions and handling exceptions. If you remember one thing, we test whether all rules pass, any rule passes, or whether a result should be reversed.
Hi, I am the filter function. What job do I do? I create a live list containing only the records you want. How I do my job. I scan each row in the original table and test it against your condition. If the row matches, I copy that row into the result. If it does not match, I leave it out. The important point is that I do not create a dead copy. I create a live result. If the original table changes, the filtered list updates as well. Typical business uses. Live list of unpaid or overdue invoices. Open leads for one salesperson. Courses running next month. Products below minimum stock level. Tasks due this week or projects at risk. Why learn me? I remove the need to repeatedly filter, copy, and paste lists for different users or reports. If you remember one thing, I show only the records you need.
Hi, I am the sort and sort by function. What job do I do? I arrange records into the order you need. How I do my job? I take the source data and return it in a new order. I can sort text alphabetically, numbers from high to low, dates from oldest to newest, or records using more than one rule. Sort usually sorts by a position in the output. Sort by can sort using another column or calculation, even if that column is not part of the final display. Typical business uses. Highest sales first. Oldest unpaid invoices first. Customers in alphabetical order. Tasks ordered by deadline or priority. Stock items ordered by lowest quantity. Why learn me? I keep reports organized automatically instead of making users sort manually every time data changes. If you remember one thing, I put information in the order people need to read it.
Another useful Excel feature is the named range. Normally, Excel refers to a range using the A1 syntax, a 2 to A5. But instead of working with an address, we can give that range a meaningful name. Our workbook contains a list worksheet specifically for this purpose. For example, in column A, we have our approved job status values. Not started. In progress. Complete. These are stored here in the list worksheet in this range. We can give that range the name Job Status List. So instead of thinking about the A1 reference style like A2 to A5, we can simply refer to Job Status List. A quick and simple way to create a named range is to simply select the cells and type in the name here in the name range box. Remember, don't use spaces. The workbook also gives us an important example of combining named ranges with Excel tables. The customer names are stored in the customer name column of our customers table. We can create the name customer names and make it refer to customer name column of the customers table. To do this, go to the Name Manager box in the Formula ribbon and then click New. Type in customer names in the name box. Finally, select the table column that you require, in this case, the customer table. This is particularly useful because the name is linked to the table column rather than a fixed range. If we later add more customers to the table expands and the named list expands with it. That is one of the main reasons we use named ranges throughout the Lana Builds workbooks. They make formulas and workbook controls easier to understand, and they are especially useful when creating drop-down lists. Drop-down lists are not just there to make a workbook look better. They are an important data entry control. Look at the status column in our jobs table. We want users to choose from 4 approved values: not started, in progress, waiting, complete. Without a drop-down list, somebody might type complete, completed, finished, done. A person may understand that these all mean roughly the same thing. Excel doesn't. For functions such as COUNTIFS and filter, those are different text values. So instead of allowing users to type anything they want, we create a controlled list. Our approved values are stored on the list worksheet and can be given the named range, job status list. Then we select the status cells in the jobs table and choose data, then data validation, and then list. For the source, we can enter job status list. A good trick is to click the F3 function key. It will bring up a list of all the named ranges in your workbook. Then select the named range that you want. The user now selects one of the approved statuses from a drop-down box. The same idea can be used for other fields in our workbook. For example, customer names can provide the customer list used when entering jobs or selecting a customer on the inquiry screen. This gives us 2 major benefits: faster data entry and more consistent data. And consistent data is essential if our formulas, dashboards, and control checks are going to work properly. Good spreadsheet design isn't just about getting the right answer. It's also about making it difficult for users to enter bad data. We've already seen one example, drop-down lists, but other controls might include restricting entries to valid dates, restricting numbers to sensible ranges, using IDs rather than manually retyping names, highlighting required fields, protecting formula cells. These controls try to prevent errors from happening, but even good controls can't catch everything. That's why our larger Lana Builds workbooks often contain another type of protection. They all have control checks so that we build spreadsheets we can trust. A control check looks through the workbook for something that may be wrong. For example, duplicate ideas can cause huge problems. Missing required information. Negative values where negatives shouldn't exist. A job marked complete but with no completion date. A payment that doesn't match the expected amount. Records that don't balance correctly. This is different from a drop-down. A drop-down is designed to prevent a mistake. A control check is designed to detect a mistake. That distinction is important. In well-designed business workbooks, we often use both. For example, prevention. Only allow users to select not started. In progress. Complete detection. Check whether anything marked complete is missing its completion date. That is a much stronger design than simply hoping users enter everything correctly. Helper worksheets. As our workbooks become more sophisticated, you may occasionally see a worksheet with a name such as helpers or workings. These worksheets aren't normally intended for everyday users. They contain supporting calculations or lists needed elsewhere in the workbook. For example, sorted lists, ranking calculations, dynamic selections, intermediate calculations. There's nothing wrong with helper calculations. In fact, they can make complex workbooks easier to understand. Trying to force every calculation into one enormous formula can make a workbook much harder to maintain. Sometimes the better design is break the problem into sensible stages. Let's finish with the principles you'll see repeated throughout the entire series. Rule 1. One row should represent one record: a client, a student, a transaction, a job, a payment, one record per row. Rule 2. One column should contain one type of information. Don't combine several pieces of information in the same cell if they need to be analysed separately. Rule 3. Store lists as Excel tables. Tables expand automatically and give us structured references. Rule 4. Give important records unique IDs always. Don't depend entirely on names. IDs give us a reliable way to connect information. Rule 5. Use controlled entry wherever practical. Drop-downs and data validation reduce inconsistent data. Rule 6. Don't keep typing the same information. If information already exists somewhere in the workbook, retrieve it. XLOOKUP is often the answer. Rule 7. Use XLOOKUP when you want related information. Find one record and return something associated with it. Rule 8. Use filter. When you want a list of matching records, one client may have many jobs. One student may have many attendance records. One product may have many stock movements. Filter handles those one-to-many situations extremely well. Rule 9. Separate data from reporting. The worksheet where information is entered doesn't have to be the worksheet where information is analysed. Dashboards and inquiry screens should normally sit on top of properly structured data. Rule 10. Build controls into important spreadsheets. Don't simply assume the data is correct, check it. A professional workbook should help us identify when something doesn't look right. The real purpose of the Lana Build series isn't simply to teach individual Excel functions. It's to show how Excel functions can be combined to solve real organizational problems. Learn the building blocks once, then use them to build practical Excel solutions for almost any organization.